Hi, love. So, I want to share today to start. You may not know this, but I am an introvert. And I recently just did my personality testing. I used ChatGPT actually to compile my, Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, and human design. And someone had told me that you can put this in ChatGPT and get this, sort of like consolidated assessment of yourself, which was really fun to do and honestly didn't reveal anything to me that I don't know about myself already. But what I found so helpful about this was that it just gave me the insight to say, oh, right, that isn't just a quirk about me. That isn't a fault of mine. That is part of my personality. And there can be pros and cons that come with some of those things, strengths and weaknesses. So it was cool to see and applying it to my business, how I am, in my work, how I am in life. It was just illuminating. So if you are curious to check it out, I highly recommend that. The point being of this is that, I kind of reconnected with that. Like, yes, I am introverted. And a lot of the time I act like I'm not, like having a podcast and putting my voice out there like this. It really isn't in a way aligned with my personality because again, I am introverted and I don't necessarily always show myself, and very vulnerable with people, especially in person when it's even more vulnerable. But I show up anyway because I am so passionate about changing the conversation around women's health. That is the point of this podcast. It's why I have been so, inspired to do it and, keep showing up because it is so important to me. I like so many other women have had the experience of feeling really dismissed by the medical system, even as a doctor, which is arguably maybe even more frustrating because I'm like, how can I not help myself? How can I not, get more insight from doctors or more care, especially when I was, in the conventional world. So many of us are dismissed by the medical system, and that's largely because the traditional medical system is still geared towards pathology and illness and, survival. So basically keeping our bodies alive. And obviously, if I were in a car accident or was having a heart attack, please take me to the hospital. Do not take me to an acupuncturist, nothing against them, or a functional medicine doctor. Like that is where conventional medicine shines. And that's why the medical system was designed to save lives and to treat illness. But nowadays, in our modern world, the modern woman is not just trying not to die. She's not just trying to not get sick. She's trying to thrive and feel really good. And so this is where there's a disconnect nowadays and where women are really being failed by the medical system because, we're going to our doctors, we're saying, hey, something feels off. I have enough intuition in my body that I don't feel like my energy as good as it could be or used to be. I'm feeling like I'm gaining weight, my hormones are off. Something is off. Like we have this intuition where we know that something is not right. And then we're being told that everything's fine. And, there's nothing you can do. Oftentimes, maybe there's some testing that's done. It looks normal, but it's just not fitting with how you feel, or it's not really helping you get that insight that you're actually looking for to understand what's going on in your body, to understand how you can, optimize your health for the long run and really, have ongoing health in your future. That's where functional medicine shines. That's why I do what I do. And that's also, again, why I'm here to talk about these things so you understand what the possibilities are. So you don't have to feel like, well, my doctor said everything's fine, so I guess I just have to go and live like this for the rest of my life. No, that is not the case. There's so much you can do to optimize your health and get those insights into your body, really understand and feel aligned with your body, feel at home with your body again. Those things are all possible. So, with all of that said, today I'm talking about some basics, back to what I talk about every day with my patients. And I realize I don't know if I've really talked about it enough here, is why you could be feeling off even if your labs are normal. So, again, I kind of laid the groundwork then. Maybe that makes sense of what I was talking about. That is no understanding why the conventional medical system was created, or the kind of underlying point of it, that can help you understand that when you go to a doctor, they are still geared towards, is something pathologically wrong? Meaning, is there something that is going to, threaten your life? That is what the testing and guidelines are still designed for. Not to say that isn't important. Again, absolutely that's important. And doing testing early on can catch dangerous, crazy, scary things. That is absolutely part of the conversation also. But again, there's also this optimization conversation that is really being missed when typical testing is getting done. So again, this is a really common frustration that I hear from pretty much every woman who comes to see me and becomes a patient. And so I really think that this is a great starting point to talk about so that you understand kind of where you can go from here. So let's start with something most women don't know, that lab reference ranges are not built around how women feel or how our body can be functioning optimally. Again, it's built around statistical averages for everyone who gets tested, including people with chronic disease. And some markers more so than others are really actually including people with disease. So long story short, they can be too broad. So normal ranges can, they can say, oh, you look normal, but it could really be not optimal. And there could be a disease process happening or starting that could be missed. One of the big examples here is thyroid. So when someone, when a doctor looks at your thyroid, for one, usually they're checking one marker, TSH or thyroid stimulating hormone, which is actually an indirect marker of our thyroid. It's actually our brain giving our thyroid the signal, hey, make more if we don't have enough, or hey, you can back off and not have to make as much if, production is really good. With that, there is a super broad range of what is considered normal. And there actually has been some argument and debate around these ranges and the testing that it was done, the studies that were done to create these ranges, that most likely there were a lot of people who were not in good thyroid function that were considered normal in this range. So basically you could be in the normal range for thyroid, but still be having low energy, hair loss, weight gain, fatigue. So for TSH ranges, just to give you some applicable numbers, I like to see it under 2.5, and the normal range goes up a lot, like, much farther than that. So something to consider. Again, also it's one marker that's usually being tested and not actually the thyroid hormones themselves, which could look different than our body's perception of our thyroid, as well as, what our brain is signaling to our thyroid at that moment when testing is being done. Some other things to talk about here are hormonal lab ranges. For one, hormone testing is really poo-pooed in some medical circles, which really pisses me off, to put it bluntly, because, doctors are telling their patients, there's no point in getting hormone testing. Our hormones fluctuate all the time. It doesn't tell us anything. And honestly, that's bullshit. Sorry if you're afraid of the strong words, but that's BS. Because yes, our hormones do change throughout our cycles. That's kind of the point of our cycles. But that doesn't mean that doing testing in a targeted, strategic way isn't absolutely useful. In the way that I do testing is I do testing, hormone testing typically day 3 to 5 of the cycle. So cycle day 1 would be the first day of your period, and then, you count from there. That gives us a great, baseline hormone panel to be able to see, are you nearing menopause? What is the signaling from your brain to your ovaries? Are you in androgen excess? Is your estrogen, way out of range? There is so much information that we get from, doing it in this way. And then also we'll often do mid-luteal hormone testing, which basically just means in the middle of your luteal phase. Typically, we do this about 7 to 10 days after ovulation, or sort of about a week before your period. And this is where I'll often do estrogen and progesterone. The other hormone markers can be done here too, but really the things we want to see here are estrogen or estradiol, which is our primary estrogen, and progesterone. Progesterone is only made after ovulation. Unless you're taking it, then it could be different, or, be present at other times. But for those who are cycling, we only have progesterone after we ovulate. And so that's why we do it mid-luteal, to be able to see that peak progesterone level. Again, super useful information. Is your progesterone suboptimal? Especially if you're trying to get pregnant, that could make or break things, literally. Is your estrogen super high? If you're having high estrogen symptoms, we can pair that with this testing to be able to see, oh, wow, yeah, we are catching you really outside the normal range in that peak time. Now, it's not to say if things look normal in this range, like things could look normal, especially with our hormones, and there could still be something because yeah, of course we're missing the full picture. There is cycle mapping and things like that that we can do to really see the full picture. of your cycle hormones. But still doing these targeted tests at these times can be really helpful. And again, pairing that with symptoms. It's really important to me to not just look at numbers in isolation, to look at your labs in isolation. That is not useful, but pairing it with your symptoms, like, yeah, I'm having breast tenderness before ovulation, or I'm having a lot of histamine symptoms like itchiness and runny nose. We can pair that with your labs and really get this beautiful comprehensive picture, even with some fairly basic lab tests. Hormone testing can be absolutely useful, especially if it's done in a very strategic, mindful way. Another one that I want to mention here is iron testing. I'm surprised that a lot of doctors don't test iron at all. And if they are doing an iron panel, it's very much more rare that they're actually testing a ferritin too. Ferritin is an indicator of iron stores in our cells, so sort of a deeper layer of our iron needs. And this is where I see so many women coming in with fatigue and their ferritin is not being checked. Maybe their iron isn't even being checked, and their ferritin could be down in the dumps and it's just not being noticed. If a ferritin is being checked, there's another one too where it could look normal and still not be even close to optimal, which an optimal ferritin in my book is about 70 to 100, depending on where someone is in their hormonal phases, meaning are they in menopause? Are they, just postpartum, things like that. And so again, that it can be a really important marker to look at if someone, especially if someone has fatigue, anxiety, hair shedding, exhaustion with any sort of exercise like going upstairs. So again, to highlight the lab ranges are a big, you know, downfall of some of the conventional tests, that it isn't always, that your tests are actually normal just because they're landing in that quote unquote normal range. And I kind of also mentioned here some of the ones that are maybe just not being tested, as well as, maybe not looking at the complete picture. So the takeaway here again, you can follow the normal reference range. If you've had some testing done and it's been marked as normal, maybe go back and look at those numbers. And some of the ones that I mentioned today, you can look at that and just see, hey, am I actually, is my TSH below 2.5? Okay, that'd be great. Especially if you're trying to conceive, a TSH below 2.0 actually is even better. And then, a ferritin, ideally that's being checked and it's, at least 50, if not more like 70. Now, I want to move into, what labs are actually being tested and what actually could be done. So I alluded to some of those already, but another big downfall is that the conventional blood panels are too basic. Again, they're looking for disease and they're really just not giving us that much information, especially if we're only looking at the broad normal ranges, or again, quote unquote normal ranges. So again, what's usually being tested? Usually there's a CBC, which is blood counts, a metabolic panel, which looks at electrolyte levels, kidney function, liver function. Again, very important to roll those things out, like some disease there. But there is some optimal levels that can also be seen here if we're looking a little bit closer. And usually they're looking at a blood sugar along with that metabolic panel as well. And, maybe they're looking at lipids on your yearly testing. They're probably telling you your cholesterol is too high, which is a whole other conversation. I could actually do a whole podcast episode on that. But that's pretty much about it. Sometimes they check a vitamin D, not always. It's great when they do. I love when they do. Again, that's another very broad normal range that misses a lot. For that one, just so you know, ideally, a vitamin D level should be like 50 to 80 for optimal female health. And most people will come in just like right at 30, like just barely hitting the mark, and they'll be told it's normal. Or if it's not normal, if it's low, their doctor might suggest them to taking like 1,000 IUs of vitamin D, which is probably not enough. So I guess I should have highlighted that in the last section also. But that's about it of what's usually being tested on a typical, yearly blood panel. What's being missed there? Oh, and I didn't mention TSH again. Oftentimes for a yearly panel, they'll do a TSH as well. But as I mentioned already, what's being missed here is a full thyroid panel. So looking at the actual thyroid hormones, T4 and T3, looking at thyroid antibodies. This is one that I regularly do, that, the conventional system does not, think that that's important to look for antibodies when we don't already have a concern for autoimmunity. But in fact, I oftentimes catch early autoimmunity to the thyroid that is in a place that we can still reverse it, which is really amazing before someone's thyroid is already off and needing to be on medication. So that's a really powerful thing to screen for. Again, especially if you're feeling fatigued, if you're feeling off in your body, super helpful. Looking at an iron panel and a ferritin level for that deeper level beyond just a CBC. You can catch anemia on a CBC for sure if your hemoglobin and hematocrit are low, but that is the final step in iron deficiency if it is iron causing it. There is a lot that is happening in iron deficiency before those counts go wacky or go low. So checking iron, especially if you've had babies, especially if you've been having heavy periods, but even if you're just cycling at all, if you're a regularly cycling woman, you're more at risk of, losing that blood and becoming iron deficient. And especially if your diet isn't, super heavy in iron, if you're, vegetarian, vegan, you're more at risk of iron deficiency. So really important to look at. Again, looking at the hormones. Hormones are so largely dismissed, but can show so much. Here, I like to look at LH, FSH, estradiol, progesterone, again, mid-luteal after ovulation, testosterone in women. Wow, that one's so overlooked. Even when people are testing hormones, testosterone is really important for women too, not just men. And it's so impactful with our libido and our drive, our motivation, our ability to, build muscle and feel really strong and have good endurance during workouts. So that's a really important one to check also. DHEA sulfate, which is a precursor to testosterone and an adrenal hormone, cortisol, our adrenal hormone and waking hormone. You know, these, testing in the blood, it is a broad way of looking at it because cortisol really does fluctuate throughout every single day, but it's still helpful because, I'll still see women on the low end of that, on the high end of that, or, already high outside of the range. And it gives us great information to pair with their symptoms. Looking at insulin. Insulin is the hormone that controls our blood sugar. So important to really see what our blood sugar is actually doing if we have insulin resistance before we're actually diabetic. So that's really important. Hemoglobin A1C, that one actually is another, common one that is being tested. It shows your average blood sugar over a few months. But again, it's sort of missing the mark. It's just really showing you that average and not really putting all the information together to see if your insulin itself is high or low. Is that in the optimal range? So many people who are not even close to being diabetic or pre-diabetic can still have insulin resistance, can still have dysregulation with their blood sugar. So it's a really important one to look at. Looking at inflammation markers too. This is, really just looked at for people who maybe have cardiovascular risk already. But honestly, it's so important for all of us to check it to really just see, do we have inflammation in our body? That is the number one driver. Well, arguably metabolic disease versus inflammation. These are the biggest drivers of all illness in our bodies, cardiovascular health, dementia, all of it, you name it. So screening for those is really important because even in our, 20s or so, we could already be super inflamed, already have metabolic disease that again can be reversed especially if we're addressing it early. And nutrient levels. Nutrient levels are not being checked. Sometimes a folate and B12 are checked. Honestly, those aren't even really helpful because our body's really smart with keeping our blood levels of those steady. And so oftentimes, even if we are suboptimal in those or even deficient, those won't show up as abnormal until way in the future. And sometimes they even look high and then it's confusing. If you're taking B12 and your B12 level looks high, some doctors will be like, oh, stop taking that. No, not necessarily. It just could mean that you had taken it recently. So all to say, in general, nutrients are not being looked at typical testing. And this is a really big misstep and a really big, missed opportunity in my mind because so many of us have nutrient deficiencies and don't know it because our food system is not giving us the same nutrients as we really need. Just with the soils, the quality of soils as they are now, the way that food has been modified over time to be more tasty and crunchy and sweet, it's also missing a lot of the nutrients. And our variety of foods is really reduced also. So most of us are missing nutrients, and especially for women who maybe had any restrictive eating patterns in the past, whether it was for a medical reason or not, no judgment there. If you've had children, oh my gosh, you literally created human beings through like from your body. I always tell people this. So where do you expect, like, of course you're going to be deficient in things unless you've been really, really, really intentional with your diet, with supplementation. Otherwise, it's pretty much guaranteed that all of us have some suboptimal levels of different nutrients. So testing that can be really helpful. And this is not one that is really ever done conventionally, but looking at like a zinc level, a magnesium level, calcium is sometimes done on a metabolic panel. Those can be really helpful to see, at least broadly, if there's a big deficiency. Sometimes, again, they can still look relatively normal and have something going on. I like to check a homocysteine level and methylmalonic acid to look at a deeper level of basically their pathways that are dependent on folate and B12. So if those pathways are off, if those numbers are off, then we're seeing OUR suboptimal in those. So I hope that wasn't too detailed. I gave you a lot of information there. You don't have to remember all of these. It's not your job to be your own doctor. So please don't feel like you have to, be feverishly writing these all down and like demanding these from your doctor. You could also just get a better doctor. Again, I'm being pretty cheeky today. Sorry if you don't like that. But really, this shouldn't have to be on your shoulders. There are a lot of really amazing doctors out there that can do this testing for you and be able to interpret it for you also and give you the nuance to really put it all together for you. You don't have to be understanding all of these. You shouldn't have to wear all of the hats for yourself. So again, kind of summarizing this, if quote unquote everything looks fine, everything is not that much. Usually it's not a lot of testing and there are a lot of gaps that are not being looked at. So unless you're getting a really comprehensive panel, then there's probably something being missed there if you're still not feeling great despite being told that. So I want to give you a real world example of one of my patients to help just kind of put this all into context. So she was a woman in her late 30s. She came to me, we'll call her Sarah, and she had just fatigue, just was feeling sort of blah, crashing in the afternoons. She felt like her weight was sort of changing, kind of creeping up a little bit despite trying to work out really regularly. Her periods had changed a little bit more. They were getting a little bit heavier. She was having anxiety, which was really new for her. And especially before her period, she was getting really anxious and it was really starting to impact her life and her relationship with her husband. And she started having trouble sleeping also, which was making her feel even more tired on those days when she wasn't sleeping. And she was just really feeling out of whack. It felt very, abnormal for her body. So she went to her primary doctor, explained her concerns. They did some, of the basic testing, CBC, a TSH metabolic panel. They did check an iron panel. It was all normal. It all, fit into the normal ranges. So her doctor told her, you're probably stressed, try to relax, maybe, do some meditation and stuff like that. But she really felt like something was off. And she really wasn't satisfied with just thinking that this was, she was just stressed because she actually didn't feel that stressed. She was a professional woman. She had, some things on her plate, but she was like, I feel like I'm handling that fine. She was actually doing really well in her job, despite really feeling, more exhausted than ever. So she came to me. She was like, I'm really not satisfied with, this type of approach. We did more testing, after a long conversation. We always start with a long conversation about her history, her symptoms, all of that. But we did some testing as well. Her ferritin was 19, which is normal on paper, again in that broad range, but was way too low, especially for her symptoms that she was having. Her iron panel too, I wasn't 100% happy with it. It was on the low end of the range. We did a luteal progesterone and it was so low, so low. Definitely not in optimal range. We did some cortisol testing on her. We did the basic, but we also did a curve throughout the day to really get more information because again, she was having this crashing in the afternoon, feeling a little bit wired in the evening, not having an easy time falling asleep. And it was flipped. So her cortisol pattern, typically a cortisol pattern, our cortisol should spike up in the morning. This is actually what wakes us up, gets us out of bed, gets us going. And then throughout the day, it should gradually decline. Hers was the opposite. In the mornings, she was just like barely struggling to get cortisol going. And then throughout the day, it was actually rising up in the evening. This was really not a good adaptation to have going on. Her fasting insulin was elevated. So she had a little bit of insulin resistance going on, which can go along with, our body's perception of the stress, the cortisol being off, all of that can become like this vicious cycle. And she did have some thyroid antibodies that were positive. They were starting to creep up, even though her thyroid hormones themselves were still luckily in normal range. And so, we had this conversation. We were able to have this data to talk about. And really, it was no wonder to me that she felt terrible. And we were able to put all of this together. And again, really, look at her symptoms and highlight her symptoms with the data to be able to back them up and say, yes, absolutely, these are the things at play, and to be very targeted with what was going on. So we were able to address those, give her the support that her body really needed. We were able to simplify because before that, she was just kind of pulling at straws and trying to, follow everything that she saw on social media. And she was feeling really overwhelmed too about what she could possibly do. So we really refined things and met her where she was with that low energy, that busy schedule. And she was able to so quickly respond. Within 2 months, she was already feeling worlds better. Her iron status improved. Her progesterone came back online. We didn't even have to do progesterone supplementation at all. We just supported her body in being able to produce progesterone again. We got her thyroid antibodies down. We were able to just get her body calmed down, that inflammation down, that insulin back into an optimal range. And she was able to just show up even more amazingly in her life. She actually did even better in her career. She was able to just be more present, feel more confident in her body, really trust her body. So this is just one example of many of how powerful it can be to just get a really good picture of your hormones, of your numbers. So lastly, I want to talk about some top signs that your symptoms could be worth looking at a deeper investigation, especially more hormonally driven symptoms. So if you're feeling fatigued, and fatigue can be so broad, but especially if you're having morning exhaustion where you can just barely get out of bed, a really strong afternoon crash, you're feeling wired at night, or you're just feeling like heavy throughout the day. You can't get up the stairs. Like everything just feels like you're just like moving through mud. Those are definitely some signs that it's not just like you didn't get enough sleep last night. Those are some signs that you should probably do some deeper testing, looking at your thyroid, looking at your ferritin and iron status, all of that, and maybe some nutrient levels beyond that. If you're having cycle changes, shorter cycles, longer cycles, meaning the time between your periods, if it's, a lot shorter than it used to be, a lot longer than it used to be, or more irregular, it's more variable. If you're having spotting between periods, heavy periods, major PMS mood swings, that's just beyond feeling like, oh, I'm just like a little cranky or like a little bit more tearful, but really having it impact your life, that is absolutely a warning sign that your hormones are giving you. If you're feeling anxious, whether it be all the time or at certain times, like before your period is a really common time, feeling super irritable, feeling just really low resilience to stress, like any little stressor is just feeling huge to you and you can't deal with it, or you're just feeling wiped out from stress and like can't even, you know, muster the energy to feel like you can deal with any of it. Those are absolutely warning signs to address. And some of the metabolic signs. So your weight is changing, and it doesn't match your lifestyle, it doesn't match your exercise patterns or what's worked for you before, that you feel like your blood sugar is crashing between meals, you're getting really tired, really hungry, or even shaky between meals. You're having strong cravings, especially for like sugar, salty, crunchy things. That could absolutely be a sign that your metabolic health is off, your blood sugar is off, or your hormonal patterns or cortisol patterns are off. If you have like one or a few that you're resonating with, again, these are some warning signs that your body is giving you. So I highly recommend, looking back at some lab work that you've had done, or maybe thinking about getting some more detailed lab work to really see what's going on. And talking again about your symptoms with a professional who can guide you through that and really pair your symptoms and your cycle history and all of that with your data and really integrate all that together. And lastly, this is so important to have a professional's eyes on your blood work. Nowadays, I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation about ChatGPT. I use it too. It is a really cool tool. All the AI tools are really amazing, honestly, and can really just propel what we already know and what we can do. It can make things go faster. It's incredible. But keep in mind that when you're plugging numbers into ChatGPT, yes, it can give you some insight. And honestly, it's probably better than your doctor in some ways. I hate to say that. Your doctor is still better than anything. Like having that human connection with someone who really cares about you nothing's going to ever replace that. But it can give you some insights and some tips, absolutely. But keep in mind, there's so much nuance with putting your symptoms and numbers together. These AI bots are still just bots that are putting, they're computer programs and they're just putting information together, but it's still not going to be the best to really be able to, see what's going to be best for you, integrate it all together and talk about the nuance with you. And oftentimes I've tested this and there have been a lot of things that it misses also, which can be dangerous. So, working with someone who really has expertise, who really can see you as the amazing human being that you are, look at your environment, put all these pieces together, it's really important. And it's important to note that two women can have the exact same lab results and feel totally different, have different things going on, or things can be expressed in different ways. So there again is so much nuance and, so much detail that goes into really putting it all together. And really putting all of the patterns together is where the magic happens, rather than just, getting the random numbers and looking at things separately. Really integrating everything together is where the magic can truly happen and where your health can transform. Looking at testing through the functional lens, again, we're really asking what is optimal for you? Not just what's an optimal range for most people, what's optimal for you and your functioning? Does this match with your symptoms? Does this fit with your sleep, your stress, your cycles, your digestion, your energy? Those are the things that we're really wanting to look at all together. And most importantly, what root cause is creating the pattern that you have expressed in your body? So, really looking deeper to understand that. And also, there's a level of not being satisfied that I experience in my practice. What do I mean by that? I'm basically like a detective for my patients. And this is part of my own analytical brain that I just love this and I have to know why also that when I'm working with patients, if they're not getting the results that we expect in an expected time frame, I'm not satisfied. And I don't let them be satisfied with that too. I'm not like, oh, this is just age, this is how things go now. I'm like, wait, let's look deeper. Let's look deeper. Because oftentimes, even with the testing that I just talked about today, that is more comprehensive, much more comprehensive than what's typically being done, we're still scratching the surface. And there's still more that can be done looking at, I did mention the cortisol patterns, that like daily pattern, looking at, cycle mapping, looking at our gut health, our functional pathways in our body on a deeper level, screening for toxins and heavy metals and, looking at mineral levels. There's so much that can be looked at. And it's just like that's even not like there's so much testing out there. I keep it pretty concise in my practice, and that reveals so much information to us and really just helps us get people to where they want to be and have them thriving. And again, this is just so important to me because I see the magic that can happen in the world when women feel amazing in their bodies. When you feel confident and clear and sharp, you're showing up in the world and creating change, whether you know it or feel it or not. When you know, go into a room and have that vibrance and that presence, people feel that and you are impacting other people's energies. You are impacting, your workplace, your family. You're showing up for people in a different way and you're inspiring them also to also feel differently about themselves, to want to be better in their body. It is an incredible ripple effect. So again, you can probably hear the passion in my voice. I'm so passionate about this because it really is incredible. And that's why I feel so strongly about, really giving women the support that they need so that they can understand their bodies. They can be empowered with this information. They can run with this information and just feel so amazing and be able to change the world. With all of that said, I hope you found this helpful. I hope this wasn't overwhelming. I get in tangents, I know. But to conclude, if you are in a place where you feel like things are off and you're just not getting the testing that you need, you're hitting a wall with your doctor, you're feeling kind of stuck and you don't know where to go, please feel free to reach out. I offer free clarity calls where we can talk about where you are in your health journey, what's brought you to where you are now, what's keeping you feeling stuck, getting clear on where do you want to see your health, where do you want it to go, and what's going to be the step to move you closer to that. So I'm happy to talk to you about that and help support you on your journey. So again, you can go out and change the world. All right, love you. Bye.